So we collaborated on an approach to really understand what folks who are needing a CMS, what are they facing? What is it like to really try and make that choice here and now today in these really interesting times? We decided to do this survey to get a better understanding of how people who are making a decision around a CMS, how are they doing it? What's worked for them, what's not? What are the challenges they're going through? How has a variety of trends, like the fact there are more CMS options, and every CMS is really trying to innovate. How are those things having an impact on the approach that these people are taking to selecting a CMS? We developed really focused questions in the survey, and we also made sure we had a really great focused sample. So the people, participating in the survey were really people involved in the CMS decision. They were leaders, and they also represented a variety of stakeholders that are more and more typical in a CMS decision today. We also really wanted to factor in the fact that, especially when you're doing this in a large organization, an enterprise, or, really mid-size and up, there are a lot of people involved, a lot of stakeholders, because content today is serving a lot of different business functions, certainly marketing, but also other functions. And so we wanted to understand a bit more, how are people handling that when they're going through the process? And so we got some really good detailed insight from people very focused on these kinds of decisions. So our sample for the survey was really solid. We had people in leadership roles, kind of representing a variety of stakeholders, and got really good feedback. And then we also conducted some interviews to complement that survey. And that allowed us to really ask follow-up questions, take a deeper dive into what it's like to make this kind of selection today. And then we synthesized that with, at Content Science, our experience with helping organizations make these kinds of decisions, and certainly dotCMS, your experience in going through selection processes from your perspective. So it was really great to kind of laser focus on this very important decision that organizations face today. With the article, what we wanted to put together in a really easy to understand and use way was what to think about if you have an inkling, a sense that maybe your organization needs to make a change when it comes to a CMS. What are some of the common signs that, actually that inkling you have is spot on, and you probably should get going on making a CMS change? And so that article is based a lot on the research as well as our experience at Content Science, and just really tries to put some of the signs in practical terms. And one of my favorites is the fact that if you have multiple CMSs, that in and of itself might be a sign that you need to change the approach. And if you have to use 2 hands and feet to count how many CMSs your organization has, you probably are not on the right track. And it's a sign that the organization is very siloed in their approach to content. Different groups, functions have selected different CMSs because they felt, a different CMS was important to them. And it just happens organically. It's not that anyone is trying to do anything wrong or has bad intentions. That in and of itself is an easy signal that you can talk about with leaders, talk about with other folks involved in the decision, and they can get it pretty quickly that, oh yeah, this really could be a problem for scalability, or you might already be experiencing some problems. So that article provides just a lot of handy ways to start thinking about whether your organization should consider engaging in this process of selection. And then the guide, the modern guide to selecting a CMS, really excited about that because, again, it's based on research, but also very practical and gets into a lot of detail about you as a leader. If you want to kind of start this effort to select a different CMS, this is really geared for the mobilizers out there who like to make positive change and big differences in their organization. How do you get that going? So this isn't, blue sky, idealistic kind of stuff. This is, okay, here are typical stakeholders that likely need to buy in. Here's what we find typically they're interested in and need. So you've got to factor that into the approach. It's honest about, yeah, there's some effort and there's some work here to make this selection, but we've got checklists in there. We've got reference tables. We've got, easy to read, scan tips that make this whole process a whole lot easier. So you can go into it with a lot of confidence. In the CMS selection process, we gain some insights into, first of all, what drives the need for a new or different CMS. And we learned a lot about those drivers. So one was that the organization felt like making updates to content were slow. They were looking to accelerate the publishing or production process. Related to that, organizations or people participating in the survey and in the interviews felt that they were too dependent on IT or development to make changes or updates to content or create new content. So, having to reach out to IT to, fix a typo or, make an update to a product description, very slow, cumbersome. And so they're looking to a different approach, and CMS being a really big part of that. Another big driver for making that a change to a CMS was having issues with scalability or performance. So that obviously covers a variety of issues and problems and challenges, but organizations are really facing high demand for content. It serves not just marketing, but entire customer experiences. It's also important for a lot of key communications. The fact that a lot of organizations have multiple CMSs and they're really looking to consolidate. So this certainly relates to scalability and performance, but that specific insight of many organizations are facing a situation where they've got a variety of CMSs, they don't necessarily work well together, and they realize they need a different approach and likely need to pick a CMS that's going to meet more of their needs across the organization. So that set of drivers, that was a huge insight from this research. And then we also learned a bit about the more specific approach that organizations are taking to select a CMS. Something really interesting there was that a lot of people rely very, 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 very heavily on word of mouth. And they don't select, or they don't consider many CMSs. So they kind of start this process right off the bat with not that many options. And I thought that was really fascinating because we are in a time where there are more CMS options than ever. And there's a lot of innovation happening in and around content management. So the fact that many organizations don't seem to be factoring that into their consideration set, they're really starting off the bat with something they've heard someone else that they know is using. I think that's an opportunity to improve the CMS selection process, because at least at the early stage, what we've seen at Content Science is, if you take a bit of time to really widen that consideration set, really look at what is out there and make sure that you do your due diligence on that. From there, you can move pretty quickly into a more narrow set where you can take deeper dives into the possibilities. But, if you don't have at the very beginning a wider consideration set, you're really at risk of missing out on some great options. Another interesting insight was that, the folks that felt the most comfortable with their selection, they did things like involve stakeholders, earlier in the process. And they also made sure they had tailored demos, not just the general demos that, a CMS vendor might provide that, shows general use cases. But the, more successful or people who felt more comfortable with their selection really went to the trouble of making sure they got demos that matched use cases, scenarios, needs that they have. And of course, that implies those organizations went to the trouble to actually think through what are the priority use cases, what are the things that are really important to us. And doing that requires involving the stakeholders up front so that you really have the comprehensive view of what your priorities and needs are. So yeah, it's definitely, we gained a lot of insight into what today, in our modern times is key to making a successful CMS selection.